In the previous parts of the All About Text tutorial series, we learned how to use text objects to make compositions similar to this one. Today we're focusing on curving text along paths and shapes. By the end of the tutorial, we should have something similar to this. Besides our familiar free text, and wrapped text inside a shape, here we also have text curved on a path, and texts curved on shapes. Please make sure you have already watched the previous parts so you can follow along. Curved text is one of the most popular topics people want to know when they start. Let me switch to tab Documents, and create an empty image, so we can focus just on that. Dimensions are not really important at this point. I'll just create a new high-definition image, with transparent background. In PaintShop Pro, text can be curved either on shapes, or on paths. Shapes are created with any of the tools over here, while paths are created with the pen tool. As a matter of fact, shapes are a limited version of paths, but they can get converted to paths at any time. For now, let's start with an ellipse shape. Just like text objects, shapes have their own options toolbar. This option makes sure that the ellipse will be created on a new vector layer. You can adjust any option however you like, but for now I'll just change the fill color to white. To draw a perfect circle instead of an ellipse, we enable the corresponding icon over here. We could also enable the Draw Ellipse icon, and hold down the Shift key while drawing the shape. It would give us a perfect circle too. Let me now center the circle in the canvas. It is a little too big, I think. I'll scale it down a bit with the pick tool, and center it again. Good. By the way, the Options toolbar of the Pick tool provides icon shortcuts for positioning objects on the canvas. So here we have a circle object, centered in the middle of the canvas. Just like with texts, we can expand its vector layer in the Layers palette, to see the object itself. We can now fit some text on the perimeter of the shape. As we saw already in part 2, when the text tool is active, the mouse cursor changes depending on its location, compared to the shape. On the inside, it will create wrapped text inside the shape. We do not want that. This time we want to click on the stroke, when the mouse shows the T letter, angled on a curve. First let me set the fill color of the text to black. In PSP, inner alignment of text which is fit on a path, can be really confusing, no matter the setting. Personally, I'm always using either left or center, but frankly I rarely utilize them. Click on the perimeter, type in the text, and apply it. As expected, the new text object was created on the same vector layer with the shape. Contrary to wrapped text, fitted text can be moved independently to its attached shape. It moves along the perimeter of the shape. We can also use the Pick tool, which is the standard tool for moving and transforming vector objects. For precise positioning, we can use the arrow keys on the keyboard, like I'm doing right now. The text is moving 1 pixel at a time. Holding down Ctrl or Shift when using the arrow keys, we can move the text by 10 or 50 pixels at a time, respectively. For even bigger steps, we can hold down both Ctrl and Shift. This will move the text by 100 pixels at a time. Let me now quickly move it back, at the top of the circle. At any given time, we can detach the text from the shape. There's a special command, located either inside the context menu of the text object, or in the Objects menu at the top of the screen. But look what happens when we're detaching this particular text. It goes completely off canvas. The reason is that we moved it around a lot, while it was still attached to the circle. I'm using the mouse wheel to zoom out, and bring it back. I will now attach it again to the circle, but this time using the command Fit to Path. First, I need to select both the text and the circle. Then I can issue the command, either from the context menu in the Layers palette, or from the Objects menu at the top of the screen. Here it is, attached to the shape again. Since I haven't moved it around the shape perimeter yet, it will stay on canvas if I detach it. So keep that in mind. At this point, I'd like to also point out that the commands detach object from path, and fit text to path, are also available for text wrapped inside a shape. Once a text has been attached to a shape for the first time, via a mouse click, PSP remembers the type of attachment, and uses it automatically every time we apply the commands on those objects. Okay, back to our fitted text. As I mentioned earlier, contrary to wrapped text, here we can transform the text independently to its attached shape. It always stays bound to the perimeter, but for example we can scale it, without affecting the shape. We can also rotate the text, which is another way of moving it on the shape's perimeter. Additionally, we can scale the shape, without affecting the size of the attached text. However, when we move the shape, it screws up the text position. I really do not know why is that. I have tried several things, including inner text alignment, but it always ends up screwing up the text position. I know though, that we can safely move the whole thing around, by moving the vector layer itself. Let's move now to some more properties of curved texts. Formatting them in edit mode is the same with everything we have learned so far. For example, we can adjust the letter spacing, we can change the fill color, we can remove the stroke, and so on. Well, except inner alignment, which as mentioned earlier, can get really confusing in this case. Anyway, in the More Options icon, there is an offset setting, designed especially for fitted text. Positive values move the text away of the shape. This creates a visually pleasant gap between the text and the shape, in case we want to keep them both visible. Negative offset pushes the text inside the shape. Since there is less room there, the text gets a little squashed, so you may want to rescale it, or increase its letter spacing, or its font size. You can still move it around and rotate it, as we did before. By the way, do not forget to go into text edit mode every time you need to change some of the formatting settings. Of course, we can hide the shape anytime we want. Or we can hide just the stroke, or just the inner fill, as I'm doing right now, from the Materials palette. We can do the same from the Vector Properties dialog, as we learned in Part 2. Actually, inside the dialog we can adjust even more settings. Like the stroke width for example. Or the style of the line. We can achieve some really interesting effects. Anti-alias smooths out jagged edges, but I'll show you that in the text object, in a little bit. The Properties dialog is also available for text objects. Its options already exist on the Options toolbar of the Text tool, but for quick changes, sometimes the dialog is more convenient. Let me undo that, and zoom closer to the text. I want to show you what the anti-alias setting does. Without it, the edges get really jagged. Looks ugly, but in some cases like in pixel art, we do not want anti-aliasing. So for any vector object, we can switch anti-aliasing on and off, from here. Text objects in particular, have one more anti-aliasing option, but we need to switch to the Text tool. Once again we can turn it off, but instead of simply enabling it, here we can choose between sharp and smooth. Anti-aliasing works by blurring the edges. Sharp blurs them less than smooth, so it makes tiny text a little more readable. Just for the sake of completeness, let me very quickly show you anti-aliasing for shapes too. Note that besides the offset, all other settings we explored so far are not specific to attached objects. They're available for any text, path or shape, at any given time. Now suppose we want a new text at the bottom of the circle. So we switch to the text tool, we predefine some of its attributes, we click on the perimeter of our shape, we type it in, and apply it. The problem is that we want this text to run counterclockwise, and moving it around does not do the trick. By default, PSP shapes have a clockwise orientation. We can change that, but then it would also affect the text at the top of the circle. Even though it is possible to define multiple orientations for different portions of a shape, it is much easier to just create a new shape for the new text. First, let me detach the new text from this circle and create a new shape for it. I'll keep it inside the same layer with the rest of our objects. There is an easy way to make the new shape the same size with the first one. With the Pick tool active, we select both shapes in the Layers palette, making sure that the older shape was selected first. Then we simply go to Objects, Make Same Size, Both. Here it is. We can also use the Objects Align submenu to quickly position the new shape exactly on top of the first one. Just like we learned in part 1. Very nice. Let me now hide the first shape and text, so we can focus on this one. We need to convert the shape to a full path. First we select it in the Layers palette, and then we activate the Pen tool. This is the tool for everything related to paths. Once again we go to the Objects menu, and this time we select Convert to Path. These little squares are called nodes, but we will not deal with them for now. Back to the Objects menu, the Convert to Path command is disabled, since the shape is now a path. We just need to reverse the path from the Edit submenu, and apply the change. Like so. If we attach the text to this shape again, it will now flow counterclockwise. Feel free to further adjust it on the shape, with the appropriate tool for each adjustment. We can now unhide the first text and shape, so we can see the whole composition. Since everything resides on the same layer, we can even transform and move them as a whole, by simply working with just the vector layer itself. As a matter of fact, what we have made here is very similar to the red stamp in the final image. Of course it uses different fonts, offsets, and styles, but the principle is exactly the same. By the way, the approved text is not attached to any shape. It is just a stand-alone text, with a drop shadow style, and rotated with the Pick tool. The inner texture of the shape is a topic we will cover in a future video. For now, let me quickly recreate the text around her left hand. We start by creating an empty vector layer. It will host our new shape and text. Next we want the shape. Just a circle for this one. To get the inner fill out of the way, we can use the Pick tool and hide it via the Materials palette. We don't need to place it precisely at this point, so somewhere around here is fine. To create some curved text onto the shape, we switch to the Text tool, and we click right on the shape perimeter. We can zoom in, to help us with the clicking. Nice! We can now type in our text, and adjust the attributes. We obviously need to change the fill color and the letter spacing, but everything else looks just about right. Back to the pick tool for positioning the whole thing, hiding the shape, and rescaling a little bit. Some final touches, and there we have it. We can also attach text to open paths, like this waistline costume text over here. Paths are very powerful, but they can get quite complex. Since they are not the main focus of these tutorials, I will quickly introduce only a few basic concepts, trying to keep it simple. If you plan to use them extensively, I suggest you look for dedicated tutorials. I will probably make one too in the future. We're back to our Scratch document. I hid the current vector layer, and made the background white. It will help us with the path readings, which are quite small. First we activate the pen tool. It is the standard tool for paths, with its own options toolbar. We keep these three options enabled, and we choose the drawing mode. For curves, we want point to point. Then we create a fresh vector layer in the Layers palette, for the new path. We are now ready to start drawing it on the canvas. To create the start point, we click and drag with the left button of the mouse. A thin arrow starts following the mouse. As soon as we release the mouse button, the point itself shows up too. By the way, points are called nodes, and the arrow is called control arm. Using the same click and drag technique, we can create the end node of the path. It gets connected to the previous node, because the connect segments options is enabled. The arrow of the control arms indicates the direction of the path. We can also add nodes in between existing ones, by holding down the control key, and clicking on the path. Just make sure the mouse cursor says, Add, before clicking. Nodes can be moved around, and their control arms can be used for changing the curvature. The two halves of the control arm can be handled either independently to each other, or in complete sync. It depends on the type of the node. By default, nodes are asymmetric, but we can change them using their context menu, or the object menu at the top of the screen. For example, with a symmetric node, it doesn't matter which half of the control arm we move. They're synchronized. Let me quickly turn all nodes to symmetric. Okay, good. To continue an existing path, first we select the end node, and then we add the new one. It becomes the new end node of the path. Sometimes when trying to move an existing node, we accidentally add a new one instead. We can simply undo, and try again. This time, make sure that the mouse cursor is not showing a plus sign, before clicking. If the node handles are too big or too small on our screen, we can adjust their appearance from the user interface menu, at the top of the screen. I prefer them large. To make them stand out even more, we can temporarily hide the path object in the Layers palette. PSP will keep showing a thin outline of the path, and now the nodes really stand out. Once we are done, we can unhide the path, and apply our changes. We don't see it right now, but paths also have a fill color. It just happens that this one was created with a white fill, and the background is also white. By hiding the background layer, we can see the fill of the path. This pretty much means that if we are to attach some text on this path, we'll have the same options we had with shapes. We can create unattached text, away from the path, and we can create wrapped text inside it. What we really want in this case though, is to curve the text along the path itself, so we should click on the path stroke. To save us some confusion, we can always hide the fill color completely, using any of the methods we have learned so far. I just used the Materials palette, with the Pick tool. I'm now switching to the text tool, so I can create the new text object, attached along the path. As a matter of fact, this is no different than attaching text to the perimeter of a shape. So I'm speeding up the video. I'm just adjusting some attributes of the attached text, I'm moving it around, giving it some offset, etc. Nothing new really. Okay, this is fine. To readjust the nodes of a path, first we select it in the Layers palette, and then we activate the Pen tool. The other way around works too. In both cases, we enter the edit mode of the selected path. Here we can further edit the node's positioning, type, and curvature. We can even add, or remove nodes. The attached text gets updated on the fly, and of course we can always undo any mistakes. When we are done, we can either apply the changes, or simply switch to a different tool. This concludes today's tutorial. We can now recreate all text objects shown in the sample picture. I'll leave that to you though, because the video is already longer than expected. In part 4, we'll focus more on text effects, including textures and gradients. Thank you for watching.